You can get the reference. I need my space. Tryna remedy anxiety. Tired of fighting with society. Take care, mama. No, I gotta take care, brother. I gotta take care to hustle. But please take care of you. Take care, mama. You know I gotta take care of sister. You know I gotta take care to hustle. But please take care of you.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Oh no, can folks hear me? I'm good now. Okay. Welcome, folks. Hi. I'm so excited to be in the space with you. Hi from Harlem. Let us know where you're calling in from, tuning in from. We got Maryland. That's one of my hometowns, Peachy County. Stand up. Love that. We calling in from Brooklyn. Hi, Gwenny. Gwenny's calling in from Brooklyn. We got California in the house. This is so exciting, y'all. We are in for a lovely, lovely treat. My name is Jashauna Wally. I use she and her pronouns, and I am coming to you as the founder and creative director of the Earthseed Black Family Archive Project. Today we are gathered because we are officially launching our third cohort. Woo! So excited to be here to host you all, to talk about the cohort experience, to answer any questions that you may have, and to really just get into it, to just be in space and community. Some housekeeping things. Wherever you are tuning in from, you can communicate with us via the chat. There'll be a space for you to ask questions. But in the meantime, if you just want to ask questions, if you want to send affirmations, if you want to send kudos, you can do that via the chat. I also want to take the time out to shout out Kinkofa. Kinkofa, Misha, and Jordan are in the house. They are holding us down with the tech support for today. So lifting them up for their brilliance. We'll hear more about Kinkofa, but Kinkofa is a dynamic organization founded by two folks who have been doing the family history work. Making sure that Black folks are resourced, supported, and have the technology that they need in order to continue cultural preservation work. We'll be sure to drop the link to their website in the chat so that you can stay connected and tapped in with Kinkofa as well. So here's what you can expect for today. You're going to hear a little bit from me. I'll talk a little bit about what Earthseed is, how we move, who we be, and why we do it. We'll get into the application a little bit, and we'll talk about, some of the key points and key dates that you should be aware of, including when the application closes, and when you will hear back from us. And then you have the treat of hearing from 4 cohort members from the past 2 cohorts who are going to share snippets of their project, share a little bit about what drew them to the Earthseed Black Family Archive Project and what they took from it. And then they'll be joining me on stage for us to all engage in some Q&A. So you'll be able to ask them questions about their experience, as well as ask me any questions about anything that you may want to know. Yes, chat with us here in the chat. Let us know how you are feeling, how things are landing, and let's get into it so that we can get into the meat and potatoes of why you're here. So who is Earthseed? What are we about? What are we doing? The Earthseed Black Family Archive Project is a community of Black folks who are interested in delving into their own family history, preserving Black cultural legacy, and using the medicine and information from our ancestors to build liberated futures. This is a space that acknowledges that doing family history work, delving into the archive, delving into our past, is not necessarily easy work, particularly for Black folks. This is a space that holds the emotional, the spiritual, the physical, and the financial burdens that it takes to do this work. And it is our hope that we can support your own desire to create something with your ancestors in mind. It is our hope that when you enter into the Earthseed community, that you never leave. And since that you go out into the world, but that you always feel connected and rooted in the community that we create here. So how do we do this work? Well, we do this work with a trauma-informed curriculum. And we do this work with the amazing help from facilitators from all different backgrounds. These are just some of the facilitators from our sessions, and I know some of my favorite sessions and a lot of other cohort members' favorite sessions. So Letitia James, she does a session on family systems. And what this session does is we look at not just the family tree structure, but the genogram map, which looks at the relationship dynamics between family members. So this is an exercise where we really grappled with what does transgenerational trauma actually look like within family dynamics, but also what does transgenerational healing look like? Who has already mended the relationships? Who has already healed the addictions? Who has already healed the broken relationships? And where are we entering in that work of transgenerational healing, right? Alexis Pauline Gumbs, dynamic oracle and writer. She has also been one of our steadfast faculty members. And she walks us through a 7-generation meditation practice. So what we know is that Black folks in the US may not have access to their family history beyond 5 generations, right? And that's like great if you do. What this practice does, it forces us to engage the imagination as a spiritual tool, and it forces us to trust what we know, right? So if I'm engaging in a meditation, going back 7 generations, asking my ancestors, what gifts do you have for me? It's up to me to trust whatever images, whatever sensations, whatever answers come from that. And then I have the beautiful Earthseed community to process and grapple with that, right? This is a favorite of the sessions of a lot of the cohort members because one, I don't think people expect it within cohort experience. And then two, I think folks really gather a lot of information from sitting in meditation. And then we had a session, Conway, who actually facilitated this session during the first cohort, and ended up applying and participating as the second cohort member. Conway took us through a movement and embodied practice. So what we understand at Earthseed is that the work of memory work, archival work, and family history work is a holistic and embodied experience. We also understand that a major barrier to doing this work may be that the stories are too hard to hold, too heavy to carry, and too much for us to work with. What this session does is it invited us to rewrite a story and transmute whatever energy comes with that story through our body. So participants were asked to bring in a story that they came across in their research and their work that was just difficult to hold. And they were asked to go through an exercise that allowed us to use our body to personify aspects of this story. And then at the end of that session, we rewrote this story for ourselves, right? So this is not to rewrite history, because we can acknowledge that history has happened, right? But it is an opportunity to reprocess how that history lands on the body, lands on the emotional self, and what from that story do we want to take from that history. And then we have also technical support, right? So Erin Glasgow, one of the founding members of Blacktivists, did a session on archiving and research tips and tricks. And what I loved about this is that they actually talked about ways to do genealogical research, archival research, without having to rely on databases like Ancestry.com or African ancestry. If you want to use those subscriptions, that's perfectly fine. But some people don't. And some people just don't know where to start. You know, when I have a deed, or when I have, you know, where do I go to find birth certificates? How do I find medical information? Erin provided a lot of information on how to move through these different databases. And it provided a lot of resources too, right? So these, as you can see, just from these 4 sessions, this is the type of approach that we have to this work. Extremely holistic. We acknowledge that you're coming into this space with your own family dynamics and your own relationship to your family history. We acknowledge that everyone is coming to this space with their own understanding of what it means to venerate their ancestors. And we're acknowledging that folks need resources in order to move through this so that they feel less isolated. And that is the type of approach that we have as a cohort, and supporting you in your family history research, in your archival research. But the idea is that we're also supporting you as someone who is ready to create something, right? So the ways that we are growing and that I'm really excited for the next cohort is that your cohort 3, will be the first time, I went back too far, will be the first time that we have access to a family historian in residence. Kinkofa, which we learned about and I introduced, who's in the room, is a dynamic resource. Jordan and Misha have just been dynamic thought partners in really thinking about how do we make the work of cultural preservation, legacy building, and family history more accessible? How do we make it more attractive to folks? And how do we resource Black people so that they feel like they can start wherever they are? Not only will Jordan and Tamisha be hosting their own session during cohort number 3, they will be serving as our family historians in residence to provide one-on-one support for cohort members to help you with things like research, but also help you think through things like what's worth archiving, what's an asset, how do I build my archive from where we are? Because Earthseed is not just committed to delving into the past and researching and using the archive. We're committed to building our own archive, right? And acknowledging that where you are and where you're starting from is the beginning of history for future generations, right? And that liberation requires your voice, requires your lens, requires your point of view, and how you are moving through learning from our ancestors and pulling medicine from the past. So I'm so excited that we will have them be a part of our team, be a part of our ecosystem, and that you all will have access to them in ways that I've had access to them that's really helped to grow Earthseed. Okay, so what should you expect from Earthseed? For your time commitment, you should expect that we meet for 3 hours, 1 Saturday per month. That's 3 hours, 1 Saturday per month. I know that sounds like a lot of time, but the time goes by really fast because we be in it, y'all, okay? We are committed. We be spending time. You are also asked to dedicate time to your project outside of the cohort experience. The idea is that we can use the cohort time to give feedback, to help you process anything that's coming up for you in the process of your creation, to provide inspiration. And we can do that if you are working on your project outside of the space. So by the time you come into the space, you have something to grapple with, something to reflect on. And then each cohort member is required to participate in the end of the year showcase. The showcase in all of the sessions will be virtual. So you don't have to worry about traveling anywhere. But this is basically the bulk of your commitment. Now, after you've decided that you are able to make the commitments to meet for the 3 hours, here are some of the things that you will get. You know, ultimately, I describe Earthseed as we are here to help you figure out your why. Why are you being called to do this? Why are you being called to create in this moment? Why are you being called to remember? We are here to resource your how. So how can we support you? What do you need in order to accomplish what it is that you're trying to accomplish? And we're here to hold you accountable to your win, and your win is now, right? Because the time for us to take on the mantle of preserving our culture, of taking our ancestors' cause seriously is now. And we're here to support you in that. So you receive one-on-one support and feedback. Again, you'll have access to Kinkofa, but you'll also have access to me, where I provide office hours to provide feedback on your project, but also to provide a space for you to just grapple with what's coming up for you emotionally as you are delving into this past. You have communal care. The Earthseed cohort is an intimate space for folks to really show up as they are, to be encouraged in their process, and to be held accountable to stand 10 toes down in the ancestral gifts that they have been blessed with. And you have access to experts. And experts is also you, right? So you are coming into this space as an expert in your own experience, an expert in your own family dynamic and family history, an expert in whatever craft you are indulging in, even if you are not necessarily, a historian, you haven't studied as an historian. You are a historian once you decided to take on the mantle of remembering your ancestors, documenting your family history, and really doing the work of memory workers in your community, right? So you'll have access to each other. And then, of course, you'll have access to facilitators of different session who come from all types of backgrounds, healing modalities, art modalities, archival research backgrounds, etc. And then each cohort member will be paid a $1,000 stipend, which will be paid in installments. So the timeline. Here are some dates that you should be aware of when, oh wait, just kidding. Who should apply? Everybody Black. If you Black and you listening to this, you are eligible. Apply, okay? And you just describe how that Black shows up for you. In the application, we have demographic questions that ask like different variations of Blackness because we are not monolithic. So you can self-identify, how you identify as Black in the application. The only, thing is that you have to be a resident of the U.S. And the only reason that is because we are fiscally sponsored by 501c3, and we're only able to provide stipends to those that are residents of the U.S. Other than that, if you Black, this is for you, okay? So tell your mama and your neighbor that they're welcome and help them with the application, okay? If you are Black, queer, and trans, understand that I am encouraging you to apply. I myself am a Black queer woman. I take creating affirming spaces for all intersectional identities very seriously. And it is important to me that folks feel affirmed, particularly folks that may feel even more isolated in doing this work, right? Because of their family dynamics, because of whatever has created space or separation between them and their past selves. So yeah, please be sure that you feel encouraged to apply. We're asking elders, and I define that as 55 and up, and young folks between the ages of 18 and 20, because we are not able to work with folks younger than 18. We're asking you to apply. We are committed to having an intergenerational space. The youngest person of a cohort was 24, and the oldest person was 72 at the time. So we take creating intergenerational spaces very seriously. So we encourage you to apply. Folks with various abilities, as long as you have access to the internet, all sessions will be virtual and the showcase will be virtual. So that's the only kind of caveat, is that you have to be able to access the internet. Closed captioning will be available. And if you need ASL or second language interpretation, that's available upon request. All you have to do is let us know in the application. There's a question that asks specifically if there are any access needs that's going to help you show up in the space, be comfortable, and feel supported. So here are some key dates and timelines. The application is officially live. Yay! Balloons, balloons, balloons. The application is live, so please share it wide. Let folks know. We'll put the link. I see that there's a QR code on the screen. We'll make sure that there's a link for you to access. It closes on Saturday, December 14th. 11:59 Central Time. I'm located in Chicago, so it will be closing 11:59 Central. Please mark that in your calendars so that you're aware. And then you will be notified the week of the 3rd. Here's what I want to say about this. If I had it, everybody in here, I think there's like 25 people watching. If I had it, everybody would be a cohort member, okay? However, that is not the current way that things are set up. And it's also really important for us to create like intimate spaces. However, if you were called to this live, if you were called to this info session, if there was something about the work that Earthseed does that was attractive to you, then you are being called by your ancestors to pick up the mantle of memory work. You are being called and encouraged to create something with them at your side. And there is no fellowship, no cohort experience, no opportunity that is going to validate that truth. So I encourage you that whatever comes from this application, that you continue to do whatever it is that has been an inkling on your mind, a tugging of your heart. Just know that, yes, the answer is yes. From your ancestors through me, the answer is yes. Do this work. Take up the mantle of remembering who you are, remembering who your people are, and create something from what you find, whether that's through Earthseed or not. With that being said, applicants will be notified the week of the 3rd. And then our first opening ceremony will be January 11th, with our public showcase being July 19th. All of the dates of each session are on the application, so you don't have to worry about trying to figure out if you would have time or not. The application outlines the dates for each session and gives you the opportunity to let us know if you can make them or not. It is encouraged that you make as many sessions as possible. The application should not take more than an hour, maybe 2 hours. We wanted to make sure that it was really accessible for everyone. So there are a lot of demographic questions, and there are only a couple of short answer questions. The two questions that I want to really focus on, the first one is tell us about your project. I want to stress here that we're not asking for a fully thought out project outline. We just want to get a sense of what is it that you're being called to create? What is it that you're being called to respond to? And how is that work going to contribute to the ethos of healing and liberation for Black folks? What type of modality are you being called? Are you being called to write a chapter of a book? Are you being called to create a photo installation? Are you being called to create some type of performance? Are you, what is it that you're being called to create? Give us a sense of that calling and how that calling is going to help ground you in healing practices and how you're prepared to share that calling with the community as an offering. And then the biggest thing is to check in with yourself. Are you emotionally available to do this work, right? So this is very emotionally laborious work. And that is why we emphasize the community, so that you don't have to do this work in isolation, but you are signing up to be a space holder for your other cohort members, as well as be vulnerable in your sharing. So that's something for you to check in with yourself on as to whether or not you feel emotionally ready. And then the second short answer question is just, who are your people? Who your people be? Who you doing this work for? What communities are you accountable to? I like to think of Earthseed as an outpost to liberation. So what would you leave behind in the outpost? Who are you hoping is going to come behind you to pick up whatever message, whatever asset, whatever thing you create that's going to help them make it to the next leg of in their journey for healing and liberation? And that's really it as far as the application goes. I mean, I'm hoping that it doesn't feel super intimidating to folks. I'm hoping that the questions just kind of spark inspiration for you, and that as you're writing, it will just flow. But just to recap, our application is open until the 14th. Applicants will be notified either way until the week of on the week of the 3rd. And if you have any more questions, if you want to kind of do a little bit more research, there are several videos on our YouTube page that you can go to. You can watch past cohort showcases. You can watch community events that we've hosted, so you kind of get a sense of how we move, what's our ethos, how we get into things. And then you can go to our webpage and learn about past cohort members, their projects, our mission, and more information about the application. And that is basically it. As far as the application, I'm sure you have several questions, but before we get into that, I want to make space for our dynamic cohort members. So I'm going to introduce everyone now, then I'll shuffle off stage, and then the next voice you'll hear will be Raina and Miss Norma. So first up, you'll hear from Dr. Raina J. Leon and Dr. Norma Thomas. So Miss Norma, as I call her, was a part of our first cohort. She is a retired educator and program director, and she has been engaged in family gerontological research and in documenting the history of African Americans in her rural Appalachian community for years. She will be joined by her daughter, who is actually a part of Cohort 2, the Ancestral Reparations Cohort. Raina is a Black Afro-Boricua from Philadelphia, the Lenape and Ancestral lands. She is an author, digital archivist, emerging visual artist, writing coach, and curriculum developer. Together, they are the founders and producers of Generational Archives, a podcast sharing their intergenerational conversations in archival research. After that, you'll hear from Kamaria Excel. Kamaria was part of our second cohort. Kamaria is a Black queer feminist doula and licensed social worker, and with a decade of experience in community engagement, violence prevention, and reproductive justice work. Originally from California, she credits her art-based lens to the vibrancy of South Central LA. Her approach to her work embodies the power of creative expression through the arts, storytelling, abolition, Afrofuturism, and is rooted in the diaspora. She will present part of her project, Shoot Goes the Ladder, a unique use of archival material and demonstrating a creative way to venerate and honor your ancestors and reimagine new narratives for old stories. Last but not least, we will hear from Shay Collins. They are a member of Cohort 1. Shay is an Afro-Caribbean multiracial blurred, hailing from the land of the free by the Carib Sea, Belize. They have worked in higher education for the last decade using a trauma-informed lens to analyze, disrupt, and reimagine policies and practices. But now they apply those skills and imagination at Soulfire Farm and supporting people of the global majority get access to training and modalities that support us being in right relationship to the land. They are their quote grandmother's baby, and they're deeply passionate about intergenerational and intergroup community and coalition building. Shay will share snippets from their project, Under the Shade I Flourish, an oral history interview with their grandmother, getting to the bottom of why she has two names. Y'all are in for an amazing treat. I'm so happy that they said yes to this. We'll hear from the cohort members, and then afterwards, we'll jump into Q&A. Thanks, y'all.
I am one of those the world looks down on. I'm not what they think I ought to be. Love has made me do things people frown on. But love is life and everything to me.
Hey, beautiful people. Hi. I'm Raina Leon, and I'm with my mom,
Norma Thomas.
and as Deshauna spoke to, and we're so happy to be with you. And thank you so much, Deshauna, and our separate cohorts for the invitation and the support along this work. That short clip is not sung by our Aunt Doris. The music actually comes from Lee Morse. The song is I'm Doing What I'm Doing for Love. But Aunt Doris is the one that's shown there. And I wanted to start with her because we talk about her in one of our early episodes for Generational Archives. And this piece about when we call the names of our ancestors, they listen. And we also have to be responsive to their call and listen. And so I grew up knowing about my Aunt Doris and how famous she was. My mom lived with her for a very short time when she first moved to Philadelphia, but we didn't know
how famous she was.
How famous. So we knew some things. My mom shared stories of her having an apartment and a a whole closet filled with costumes from the heyday of her career. But when she transitioned, all of those things, none of those things were preserved. And also, when she transitioned to being an ancestor, there was no marker. So for 40 years after she died, there was no marker. She was buried next to her mother, who did have a marker in my mom's hometown in Western Pennsylvania, in Uniontown, very small town. But only two people knew where she was buried, my mom and my great uncle, both in their 70s. And I had been poking for a while, like, that's not good. That's not good. And then as we started to do the work around Aunt Doris for the episode for Generational Archives, which was part of my work within the Ancestral Reparations cohort of reclaiming a number of different stories, more and more articles emerged. We found a researcher who was fascinated with the swing era. Turned out she was actually on the radio, listened to by millions, according to one article. That song was one that she was really well known for. She appears in over 200 articles. She was in a movie with Sammy Davis and Ethel Waters. And these are all discoveries of like the last few months. Every time we say her name, something else emerges. And I share that story because perhaps you in your own research are like, oh, I wonder what will open up. And that's been, you used to live a block away from the cemetery. Oh my goodness. She was buried at the Clearview Cemetery.
Cemetery.
Yeah. And so there is actually now a marker for her as of this past June, which would have been the 125th year after her birth, that celebrates her life. And I wanted to note around Generational Archives, since the time we're now in season 3, and we have researched a number of our ancestors, but the whole point of the podcast is sharing our stories, but also sharing techniques for finding out more about your own people, right? Whether it's interviewing, how to use publicly accessible resources, whatever it is, but doing that through the story of one person. So, Mommy, what else am I missing about cohort things?
Well, we were asked to respond to some questions, so maybe we'll just go to the questions. And one was, why did you apply? And why did I apply? Well, one of my bucket list items was to go back and explore that creative side that my daughter keeps telling me to go back and do. But I also wanted to do it while exploring my own story through that continued exploration of my family. So I've done a lot of research on family, but hadn't talked about it much outside of family reunions, maybe. So Earthseed presented that opportunity for further self-exploration to answer the question, who am I in relation to my ancestors and their stories? I seem to be the one in the family that remembers the stories. And we emphasize a lot that the databases are important and the documentation and what's there is important, but the stories are important because a lot of what we have are the stories, and not everything is documented. So Earthseed presented that opportunity to do that exploration, which resulted in the podcast and also resulted in, I had started a traveling museum, which was an outgrowth of all the research, because in my hometown, a lot of the history of African American folks was not talked about. People didn't know what our history was. And so in finding my family's history, I find everybody else's history. So we had started a traveling museum, but in June, on Juneteenth, we launched the brick and mortar History and Cultural Center, where we do interviews of elders and get them to tell their story and a whole bunch of other stuff.
Yep. So
why did you apply?
So one of the things that also was interesting about our collaboration, and we've collaborated my whole life in multiple different projects, but we were invited to do a workshop with Ebony Noel Golden, which was all around creative practice and as well as ancestral research. And I think that might be how the connection to Earthseed emerged, maybe. or the timing of it was coincidental for the closing of that project with the Wheatsville Heritage Center. And so you applied, and I was like, life is happening. And then I had the great joy of being able to witness you in your presentation, which was focused on my grandmother and her two mothers. And so being able to do some of the tech stuff behind scenes and support my mom.
Yes, because I needed help with my project. So I have a techie person right next to me. And it was that PowerPoint.
Yeah.
And it was called, my project was called My Mother Had Two Mothers. And one was her biological mother and the person that raised her, and all the secrets around that whole experience and bringing all that to light.
So I applied because my mom had that experience. I saw the call again. And then at one point it was very Chicago specific. And then there was an opening. And I was like, yes. Like, fantastic. I've been hoping to be a part of this. So that's how I came into the cohort experience.
So another question is, what did you find in the cohort experience? And for me, it was acceptance. Deshauna talked about the age group of people applying, and as one of the oldest people that has participated, I don't know if anybody's been older than me, but I wasn't sure how I would fit in with the group because everybody was much younger. But very quickly, I realized that this was a very supportive, accepting, affirming group of people, and that everyone was really open and encouraging, and that everyone was made to feel that they had something to contribute, and that we can share what perhaps many of us had never shared with anybody else before about our journey and our families and those experiences, some of which are wonderful and some of which are not so wonderful. But it was a place to share. And again, that sharing in my project was my mother's whole story, which is a story of trauma and resilience and all of that put together. So what did you find?
Co-sign everything she said, and feeling held in the challenges of exploration, as well as continually creatively inspired. Just the cohort that was gathered together was doing such incredible creative work, hard work, vulnerable work. And so every time I would go to a gathering, and sometimes I got 3 babies at the time. I was 2, and I think pregnant with the third, 6, 4, and 7 months. They make a lot of noise. They're amazing babies. But at the same time, you're listening to the babies in the background and trying to really focus, and it can be really hard. It was really hard for me sometimes. And yet feeling held in being able to do my work, and also on occasion when my children would descend or ascend, depending on where I was in the house, they were always welcome too. So feeling held in my creative practice, inspired in creative practice, and always a space of welcome for whoever was showing up, whether in spirit form or another baby new being body in the space.
So what did I take with me? It was an amazing journey. And not only did we get a lot of insight and information from all the many incredible presenters, but we learned as much from each other.
Yeah.
And the sense of group and group work and how to make a group work with people coming from all walks of life, and how people can work together and learn from each other and produce projects that are amazing, to say the least. And and Deshauna is a master group worker.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
how, keeping us all to be able to go forward and even work through sometimes what could be difficulties is just amazing.
Yeah.
So what's your thought?
Co-signing on everything, and co-signing on Deshauna as an incredible, just gifted facilitator of being able to hold and support people in the depth of feelings, and being incredibly responsive to whatever the resource needs are, to extend and find things, and oh, you need to do more research around DNA and ancestry. I got a resource for you. Oh, check out Kinkofa. Like, I'm finding out about all these different spaces and organizations and outgrowths through her effective, thoughtful listening to us gathered. So I celebrate that experience too, of the cohort experience with what it was through what we made together, and that was facilitated by Deshauna. The last thing that I'll note, especially because you shared about grandmama and your experience, was going back to one of the early episodes with Generational Archives of, I said at the very beginning of, when we call the names of our ancestors, they listen, they respond. So my mom, for years, most of my life, had talked about how when my grandmother transitioned, there was a recording of her voice that was shared with all of the siblings at her funeral. One by one, those recordings disappeared for different reasons. My mom was the last one who had it. She gave it to a sister to record. It disappeared in the 80s.
Well,
right?
To take it from tape to CD.
Right. So to distribute that way, disappeared in the 80s. I had heard this story my whole life. So talking about like the deep loss of my mom and her siblings, and the loss of their mother's voice. As we're talking about it, as we're recording some of the first episodes for Generational Archives, and we're preparing to do one on my grandmother, what shows up, y'all? That tape recording. My aunt was unloading her thing. She was preparing to her house to move. Finds the old recording. I bought a little device to transfer from tape to MP3. And for the first time in decades, I'm able to witness my mother hear her mother's voice singing again. When we say the names of our ancestors, they listen, right? And one of those episodes, the one that's on her story, includes a sample of that recording. So I hope that you too, when you are doing your ancestral reclamation, your memory work, that you have that continual affirmation of what of them listening to you. So,
and again, if you're ever listen to Generational Archives, you'll hear our different family stories, and again, going through this experience, Generational Archives was a result, but also that brick and mortar history and cultural center. Yes. That when I hesitated about getting that space, my daughter said, well, are you dying tomorrow? Why are you worried about, getting this space? And it's like, wow, I think I'm fine. So I guess I'll just go buy this building. And she asked me if I was worried about her inheritance, and of course I laughed hysterically.
I'm not getting nothing.
So there's your inheritance in that other building. But it has been an amazing blessing. So great things can result from being part of this cohort experience. So thank you for listening to us.
Thank you all.
That was so beautiful to witness and listen to. And Dr. Raina was in my cohort and was just such an inspiration to hear her journey and Dr. Norma's journey in archiving their family legacy. So I'm happy to be following their brilliance. As Shoshana said, my name is Kamaria Excel. I use she, her pronouns. I was a part of the second cohort of Earthseed, and this is my project that is up on screen. It is called Shoot Goes the Ladder. And it was my representation and my grappling of fumbling and figuring out how I wanted to represent the family stories that had been bestowed upon me prior to the cohort, and then that just like expanded so much more vastly after the cohort. One of the things that I wanted to name as one of my fears of applying to Earthseed was like that question Shoshana highlighted around like, what's your project? I can't even tell you what I put on that original paper as my project. I know it was not what you see on screen. So don't let that be something that holds you back. Even if you just have an idea, a thought that you know you could trace and see through, I would super encourage you to apply. I didn't come up with this concept until I want to say like middle to late February. Our cohort started in December. And so for months, I was racking my brain around like how I was going to do it, what it was going to look like. And my ancestors just like bestowed this upon me randomly before one of the meetings in February. And this is what I started to grapple with. So if that's one of your fears, take a deep breath and just go ahead and let whatever questions you're sitting with guide you. Our cohort focused really on the question of what do reparations look like for Black people? And so my board is a representation of what I believe the kind of reparations my ancestors would have benefited, and holistically, right? That's one of the things that I loved about our cohort is like, yes, it's financial reparations, absolutely, but also like access to our cultural artifacts. It's also access to a decolonized healthcare system and mental health system, right? It's like reparations is so multidimensional, and for Black folks, it especially needs to be very holistic. Another thing that I want to name as a fear that I had going into the cohort was maybe around, I knew I wasn't at the very beginning of my journey with my ancestors. Like I had a lot of information. I'm was very close. My grandfather and my great grandmother, who are now ancestors and no longer here in the 3D, but I had those really tight relationships with them. And I know since their passings, they have spoken to me in various ways. And so I knew I wasn't like brand new on this journey, but I know that I wasn't as advanced as a lot of other folks I would probably be applying. But that ended up being one of the most beautiful things that I enjoyed about the cohort was that everyone was on such different levels. Dr. Raina, right? Like, and her mom had already had their podcast. So it was beautiful to hear her come into the space and talk about how they're processing versus other cohort members who this was their step one of their journey, right? Like they just were trying to answer the call. They had a little bit of insight, but nothing full. And so being able to venture for 6 months together and hear the vastness of other people's journeys was really beautiful and it inspires you, right? In your own work with your lineage to see just the grand way that we can hold our ancestors, that it doesn't have to be and should not be binary at all, that we should be thinking about all these different ways to bring our ancestors into every space that we enter into. Another beautiful thing that I walked away with the cohort with was just this creativity and inspiration, and just really honestly excitement. The archive can be so devastating and so incredibly painful. And during the 7-generation meditation presentation with Alexis Pauline Gumbs, one of the things that they did was walk us through being able to meditate and allow our ancestors to come into this space with us. And one of the gifts that my great grandmother gave me was like, don't forget your hunger. And I remember ending that meditation like, really? She just told me like not to be hungry. And my grandfather also came in that meditation and said, don't forget to laugh. And now being removed from it and having gone through the cohort, my ancestors were really forcing me to think about, yes, they went through some tragically painful things, some really devastating things in their lifetime, but they were also so incredibly multidimensional, and they laughed and they had joy and they danced and they cooked really good food. My great grandmother was an amazing cook, right? And that was one of her medicines in the way that she gave to her family and to her community. So being able to also see my ancestors in the fullness and the complexity of who they are was one of the things that really shined through for me during the cohort experience. And even now that I'm removed from it. Another 2 presentations that really stuck out to me. I love that, Joshana, you picked all the sessions that I was going to highlight as impactful. So just goes to show how good those sessions were. But in Letitia James' session, one of the things that kind of got me to thinking about the Chutes and Ladder board was in that session, she so tenderly described how she was also archiving her family's pain points. And so for me on my board, you'll see, I don't know if it's still on screen. I can only see myself now. I don't know if you all can also see my board. Okay, I just zoomed out and I can see it. You'll see on my board, there are ribbons on some of the folks' pictures. And so this picture towards the left side of your screen, there's a young brown woman, that is my grandmother. And on her picture, you'll see that she has a teal ribbon, and that is a ribbon that denotes sexual violence. Unfortunately, she was assaulted by her father. And so that was my way of archiving a very painful experience. And if you know anything about chutes and ladders, you know that ladders take you up the board to more positive parts of the board, and the chutes or the slides are seen as negative. So if you're playing the game of chutes and ladders, you want more ladders than you want slides. And so that was my way of thinking about a world in which Black people have reparations. What are the things that lead us to reparations, and what are the things that take us away from there? And so obviously I'm envisioning a world where survivors are completely autonomous, where we handle sexual violence in a way that is tender, in a way that is decarceral. And so my grandmother's picture and her ribbon of sexual violence is connected to a slide, because those are pain points of my lineage and pain points in my view of us accessing holistic reparations. Throughout the rest of the board, you'll also see some ribbons. This is a picture here of my mother in all purple, and she happens to be in this picture with Janetta Cole during her time at Spelman, and they're both in purple, and my mother's also a survivor of domestic violence, and so that is also connected to a slide. Things that on my board are connected to ladders are these, I don't know if I'm like rubbing my screen as if it's a pointer, but I know you all can't see that. But there's a photo of a man and a woman in black and white towards the bottom part of the screen. Those are my great-great-grandparents. They were immigrants from Trinidad that settled in the U.S. South in Mobile, Alabama. They were from a wealthier part at the time of Trinidad and came to the U.S. with money and purchased a huge space of land. Unfortunately, at some point in the 60s, that land was stolen from my family. They were pressured to sell it to white developers, and it's now actually a high school in Mobile, Alabama. And so that is connected to a ladder because of the fact of Black folks accessing and having land. But then that ladder specifically is connected to this ethos around land back. And so this is my very messy processing of my family history. Other moments of joy on this board is a photo of my mom when she was younger. She happened to be in a girl group called Trinidad 5 or Trinidad 6, I think it is. And this is a picture that I actually found on Ancestry.com. So Earthseed, Joshana talked about the technical resources. That was something that with my stipend I was able to purchase, was an Ancestry subscription. And my mom didn't even really remember this photo and was like, oh my gosh, where did you get this from? And it was a really beautiful moment between the two of us. And so this is such a tender project to me. Every time I look at it, I change something about it. Every time I get more stories and insights from my ancestors as I'm talking to those who have passed on and talking to my family who is still alive, there's something on the board that shifts for me or changes for me. And so I love that it was the kind of project where I could be really fluid in my understanding. I think we have to be flexible, right? Like going into the archive is not a cookie cutter kind of experience. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity to have created a project that's able to grow with me and grow with my family. Another reason that I chose a game to begin with was that this was one of the joys of my childhood, was being able to play games with my family. I had a family that was, we take games very seriously. I can recall a taboo game, Christmas of 2008, that got so ugly that Christmas stopped for a couple hours while everybody had to cool off. So we don't play around with our games. But in a more serious way, games are some of the first experiences that children, or we have as children, that teach us strategy, that teach us insight, that teaches us how to be more tactile and focused. And so that is how I was holding the experience of trying to sift through what reparations look like for Black folks, but then also kind of denoting some lightheartedness. And right when you look at a board such as this, a playful board, you kind of get a little light, but then when you look in a little closer, right, it gets a little bit more serious. And so that was my way to denote the complexities. Let me just double check. I think those are the major things that I wanted to express to you. I'm like looking at my notes to make sure. But I really hope you all take the opportunity to participate in the cohort. Not being dramatic when I say this experience changed my life for the better. And really just gave me such a beautiful relationship to my ancestors and to my family living now, in a beautiful way that for years to come, I can share with future generations of the way that I was thinking about our family. And hopefully this becomes a kind of personal family archive in which people can add their pieces to the game. So thank you all so much for listening, and I hope you apply.
Peace, y'all. My name is Shay. Pronouns are they, them. I'm just over here beaming because I just really loved hearing about the game. Beautiful, Kamaria. Thank you for sharing that with us. I was in cohort 1. And Miss Norma was actually my accountability partner, which I'm so grateful for because being in community with everyone, but particularly having that one-on-one accountability really helped me get my project off the ground and like rolling. Can you hear me a little better now? No. Okay, let's try this. How about this? Can you hear me better? Okay, wonderful. So I want to share a little bit about my project before I play a clip and what made me apply for Earthseed. I applied because one, the description just had an ethic of care that I aligned with. And I was just like, ooh, this sounds like something that I could get into. I was really intrigued and excited about the cohort process and the cohort experience, especially the accountability that that would bring. Is just being in a cohort of folks doing this work. I was just intrigued and excited about that. And it was an opportunity for me to further some family history work that I had already been doing. So anybody who has known me when I was a child, they will tell you that I like was a natural interviewer. Like my grandma built me a little interview stand out of like a big cardboard box with one of those little plastic chairs and got me a briefcase when I was a little kid. And I would just tell folks like, step into my office and ask a bunch of questions about people. And so that's just always been something that I've been excited about, is just like connecting with people through asking questions. And this particular project, I've been talking to my grandmother for years. In fact, in grad school, part of my senior thesis was an oral history project about her political work in Belize and the ways in which she helped to start, like after we got our independence, how she was a part of one of the political parties in our country. And so it was just like a way for me to like continue this exploration and this work with her. And the cohort felt like a place where I could be really vulnerable and process some stuff. It was a place where I could get some insights about how to ask questions and be insightful, how to be curious. Because one thing that I'm in community with a lot of elders. I'm an elder in training. And one thing that I know from being in community with so many elders is like, all it requires is curiosity to get people to like share things with you, curiosity and the ability and desire to listen. And so I wanted to be really, really curious with my grandmother. And I felt like this was like a deep place of community care that I could be able to explore that. And it was also a place for me to be witnessed and bear witness. And I think that that was really beautiful as well. And just feel really inspired. Like I'm inspired by Kamaria's project, and I wasn't even in the second cohort. So just that level of inspiration was something I was excited about. And so I chose an oral history project because I'd already been working on some oral history with my grandmother. I chose her because she's a really funny storyteller, and she just has lived a life that has been just exuberant, and a lot of different things have happened to her. She was born in 1939, and like the time from 1939 till now and the things that she's experienced, like the ways in which she shared some things with me, particularly like my grandmother remembers hearing about when automatic doors first became a thing. Like it's not something I think about because they've always been a thing in my life, but she remembers that moment where they became a thing. And so the clip that I'm going to share is a response that my grandmother gave in relation to the question of like, Grandma, why you got two names? Because my grandmother has two names and two different birthdays as well. And so this clip is her response to that. You can go ahead and play the clip, Misha. Oh yeah, I'll tell you about the screen, the doc on screen. So my grandmother is speaking in Belizean Creole, and she says it's not broad, which for us broad Creole means like really deep in your accent, like in your accent bag. But if you are unfamiliar with it, then you are likely to need the transcript on screen to follow along with what she's saying. And so that's what's on screen is I just translated what she said into English so that it's easy for you to follow along. I'm not able to hear it yet, Nisha. I'm not sure if other people are. While we're working on the tech, I'll share a little bit more about what's empowering for me about this particular interview that we've done with my grandmother. One of the things that we had been trying to track is like the names of people in our lineage. So when I started working on this project with my grandmother, she was 84 and she was having some difficulty remembering people's names. And part of that too is because in Creole, like in Belize, everybody has another name that's not really their like real name. And that's like an old superstition so that like duppies don't get you, and duppies are like ghosts. So like ghosts can't like come and mess with you. And so sometimes people don't actually know people's real names, like maybe their whole lives. Like you might call them one thing and then you get to the funeral and you're like, oh, I did not know that my uncle Gilroy was actually like named Charles. And so that what we've been trying to figure out the name of her great great grandmother, and my grandmother couldn't remember this, and it was causing her some like real angst because she's like, I know this name, I know this name. And so within the story, um she tells the story and then I start to pick up on something and I'm like, wait, let's unpack this. And we end up learning her great great grandmother's name from this story after we had been talking about this for like months and months that she couldn't remember. And then just in this story, she was able to remember the name. And we were able to fill in that name on the family tree. So that was really a beautiful part of this exploration that I was like super grateful for, that just emerged out of us like talking about this story about why it is that my grandmother has two names. So yeah, I think we'll try the audio again and then I can tell you a little bit more about this. I still can't hear it myself. Um, it doesn't seem like other folks can hear it either. but that's okay. I can just give a short recap of the name. Okay. Yeah, I'm not hearing it. So, for the sake of time, I'll just share a little bit about the story. And essentially, my grandmother was born in a really rural part of Belize, and they didn't have hospitals. They just had midwives that would come every week. And when she was born, she was premature and she fit in a shoebox. And so her grandma she slept in a shoebox at the foot of her grandmother, her maternal grandmother's bed. And then her maternal grandmother took her to meet her paternal grandmother, and the paternal grandmother was like infatuated with her and was like, "Ooh, can I keep the baby for a little while?" And so she went to live with her paternal grandmother. And in that time, they must not have had communication with each other, correspondence, because she already had a name in her rural part of the country where she was born, which was which was Ellen Vernon, which was her great great grandmother's name. She's named after her great great grandmother. But when she went to the city to be with her paternal grandmother, they gave her a different name, Marion Vernon, and they gave her a different birthday. So October 29th and October 30th. So she had her whole life, she was going by Marion, Marion, Marion. And when she finally went to get a visa to come to the United States, she was working with this young man, and he was like, "Okay, Ellen, let me give you this, you got to sign this paperwork." And she was like, "Who is this Ellen? I don't know no Ellen." And she was having this big disagreement with the man. And he was like, this in your paperwork, like that's your name, this your birthday. And just like, they had this whole back and forth. And that's when she finally realized that her name was actually like in the system, Ellen. And so she had to carry that name forward with her to the States. But all of the people that we know and know her as Marion, including me, my whole life. And so we celebrate her two names, her two birthdays, but she got the two different names because of just like a mix up in the system. But she didn't even know that her legal name, as it is on paper, was actually that until she was coming to the United States when she was in her late 20s. So that's essentially the story. And the last thing that I'll share about that is that one of the reasons that I really loved being a part of Earthseed and what I took with me is like claiming my creativity. I don't think I ever really thought of myself as a creative, even though I was doing oral history work in a variety of different mediums. I didn't really think of myself as a creative until I really like leaned into this project. And it really spurred me on to other creative endeavors that I do now with music. But it also reminds me of like, right now we're in a moment and we're all being called to meet the moment using our gifts and our talents that we've been cultivating our entire lives, and all of the roadmaps and the blueprints that our ancestors have left for us. And I feel like Earthseed is just a place for us to come together to really explore how we meet this moment and how we do it together. And that is just something that really inspired me and is continuing to hold me as I move forward and as I think about how I want to meet this moment that we're in time as well.
Yay! Thank you all so much. I felt like I was back in an Earthseed session, listening to everyone's experience and hearing about y'all's projects. So let's open it up to the group. If there are any questions that you have for me, that you have for the cohort members, I feel like they shared so much about their experience. I did see one question that asked, that's what I was going to answer, Adar. How large is the proposed cohort? The cohort will not be no larger than 12 people, and no smaller than probably 8 people. We want to make sure that it is an intimate space and a space that we can go deep and not too wide. Are there any other questions? The questions I have for the cohort members is, how is Earthseed, if at all, staying with you now? Post Earthseed, how is this experience impacting or informing how you're showing up in your memory work at all?
For us, of course, with Generational Archives, we invite people. Deshauna, you were a guest. So now we're having guests to come on and talk about their processes with archival research, with memory work. So that's this wonderful delight to have entrance into. Mommy with the museum, that's continuing.
Well, and I also think our interviews with the elders.
Yes.
We've started interviews, like people older than me, so significantly older than me, and who've been around doing community work and lived amazing lives that they don't think, just like me, people who don't think they've led amazing lives, and then come to realize that they have led amazing lives. So they always say to me, why would you ever want to interview me? And it's like, are you kidding? Because they don't see that they've led, that they're amazing. They don't see it.
Yeah.
The last one we did, she has 12 children, had 12 children, and I asked how many grands and great grands. She has over 100. And a whole bunch of them showed up at the History and Cultural Center.
I love that. I'll ask another question, and Shay, I'll ask this question to you because you talked a little bit about this. Did the members know it was right to? Did the members know it was the right time to accept the calling? How did you grow comfortable with being called a creative if you didn't use that label prior? And I'll start with Shay, but then anybody else can answer.
Yeah, it was pretty clear for me. Like, this is the work for this moment. Like, this was 2 years ago for me now. And so it was just abundantly clear, like, this is your work for this moment. Don't let your ego stand in the way of you doing some really like beautiful work. And don't let any of the fears that you may have. Also, because I had a sense that I wanted to do an oral history, didn't have a fully fleshed out project. It emerged and morphed into something, like Kamaria said, that I really loved, but didn't know was going to be the thing in the beginning. So I knew the call to answer the call. I'm grateful that I did. In terms of accepting the label of a creative, I think one of the things about Earthseed is it is a creative project. Like, just being in the cohort, surrounded by the beauty, inspiration, and creativity of everyone else, it's hard for you not to start embodying that within yourself, because you're just like, ooh, like, this is beautiful, and everyone's work is really beautiful, and also like my work is a part of this work, right? And so I think that really helped me to understand, and also to redefine the understanding of what creative is. Like, I was thinking of it in one particular type of way, and just by redefining it and having an expansive view of what a creative could be and how I fit into that narrative really helped me feel comforted and able to like hold that as a part of who I am and how I show up.
Yes, I was trying to get the unmute and then I muted myself again. I think for me, I was definitely, I know I'm supposed to be doing this work, but I think at the time I was like, oh, is it now? Like, am I ready enough? Is like what I'm going to bring to the space like good enough or valuable enough? And then I had to think about the way in which my ancestors were like forced to answer the call. Like, they didn't even have opportunity like me to be sitting there for a week and rolling around the application. Like, many of them in a split moment had to just answer the call and be the work and do the thing. And so I was like, wow, it's a very privileged viewpoint for me to even be wondering if it's my choice to be answering the call in this moment. And when I thought about what harm answering the call at that particular time could be, I really didn't have anything that was like grounded in any kind of fact. So I answered because I was like, I don't think I'm going to always question if this is the right space or if this is the right time. So if that's going to be me 5 years from now, I might as well just do it now. And it was one of the best decisions that I could have done. Similarly to Shay, I was also thinking about creativity in a very specific, like kind of finite way. I've always wanted to like be an artist, and I have used the label creative before, but I think this really pushed me in a way that I truly needed to actually believe it. I don't think I was believing it before I would say it, but I wasn't like mind, body, spirit aligned with it. And this space gave me the ability to do that.
Yes, I love that. I also want to encourage, like, it's important that folks leave with an understanding that this is not just for artists, right? This space is for folks who feel compelled to create something. Whether you feel like you want to label yourself as a creative or not, you probably are. But whether you're comfortable with that title or not is less important than do you feel like you have the capacity and the desire and the call to create something. And where you come in that journey will meet you where you are, right? And we also see creating as a modality of healing and processing. So that's the real emphasis on the project, is not for the sake of producing, but for the sake of being in practice, and in practice in a way that encourages healing, encourages stillness and mindfulness, and gives that magic, that juice that's within you, a mechanism to come out. Okay. We see another question is, what advice for those who are interested but have different obstacles that prevent them to access to speak with living family or for information if you're disconnected from your family or adopted? I think this is a great question, and I open this up to the cohort members. The first thing that I would say, is there one person in your family that you can work with or serve as your anchor? And that person does not necessarily have to be living, right? I am someone who was raised by the Black sheep of the family. And what that means is that my mother feels very disconnected from the rest of the family. And therefore, I feel very disconnected from the rest of my family. But my mom, and I would say my aunt, were kind of like my anchors. And my little sister, who also participated in the project, was also like my comrade. Right? So you don't have to go wide, right? You just have to be willing to do the emotional work that can come up with that feeling of being disconnected, right? Because if you feel disconnected, if you are disconnected, then that's an emotional experience that is going to be a part of the texture of your work. And we have the capacity to hold that for you. You just have to have the capacity to hold it for yourself. And if you are adopted, we've had folks that have shared around adoption stories. So, and also, like, we are talking about, when we say family, we're talking about the very Black, capital F, queer understanding of family. Okay. So, like, I have aunties that ain't none of us blood related, but those are my aunties. Okay. Like, so it's also like very much so to the question of who are your people. It's more so like, who are you accountable to, and in which legacy are you interested in building from? I hope that answers answers that question clearly. Let me know of Sunflowers if that was helpful. Is there anyone else that has a response to that question? Okay. We have another question. How did you navigate unearthing secrets? I will let the cohort, if there's anybody on the cohort that wants to start, and then
I just always, when you do this work, the secrets do come out. What is done with the dark in the dark always comes to light. So secrets come out. We discovered a number of secrets. And I always tell people doing this work, you find the great stories and you find the not so great stories. So you do have to understand that not everything is a wonderful moment. We found the story of, there was one uncle that popped up, my grandmother's brother, and she had a very large family, and I thought I had seen all the names. And all of a sudden, this name came up and had never shown up before, and he was electrocuted in the electric chamber for a. There were four of them that killed back in the day with the
Prohibition era.
Prohibition era revenue agent. They could not say which one shot the agent, and it went to the Supreme Court to say, can you execute someone if you don't know who fired the gun? And the Supreme Court said yes, and so he was executed even though they never knew he fired the gun, and his name disappeared until his grandchildren started looking up the story. And all of a sudden, I'm doing some searching on Ancestry, and here's this story all over the place about this uncle who was, died by electrocution. So, needless to say, that was a shock.
Yeah, and it was also a shock. One, because you knew your great uncles.
Yeah, I knew them.
And with Ancestry, sometimes some people are doing research, and then things are tagged on, and you're like, oh, this family tree over here, and actually the information is not correct for your family tree.
Oh yeah.
Or like my grandmother is listed with biological parents that were the people who raised her aunt and uncle. They're actually not her biological parents, but you wouldn't know that except through the family, because they changed the certificates. Like, it's amazing what they were able to do with the court documents to prevent my great grandmother from taking her kids back.
Yes, Shay, my mother had two names and two different birth dates.
So yeah, secrets were out. And also the story that we've shared is also cultivating a healthy critique of the information that you find. But this question too, what do you do with that when you find the record of one of your ancestors' sale as if they could ever be property, right? Like, what do you do with that? Because we found that too, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that the cohort has held in conversation with one another of like, I'm dealing with this heavy stuff here, and how do I like, there's this massive wall that has now grown up around me, in me, and how does in the cementing of that feeling, how do I push through this and reckon with the history so that I can heal? And this healing that is a gift to the self, to the gift to the past, it's also a gift to the present and the future. Like, we are working in these spirals of time. I think that the cohort experience was one for me. I think the same for you, of being able to hold that. So
yeah, those stories, they are part of who you are. Right. And so people tried to hide those stories. They do come to light. And I've always taken it's the fabric of who I am. Mm-hmm. And so the shock was there, but then it was, well, wait a minute. Now I'm looking at the Supreme Court decisions and how, the injustice of it all, and how does this not only affect him, but so many other people who mm-hmm. had those same kind of experiences, and it is part of who we are. So, but that's why discussion about trauma-informed practices is also very important too, because we know that we have a lot of that in our history, but we have a lot of resilience, because we wouldn't be here if we weren't resilient. Mm-hmm. So all of that balances out. I think it's a balance.
Yeah, for sure. I think the answer I have to that too, kudos to everything that has already been shared. Like, secrets is going to come out, right? But it's important that we remember our why, right? So we have someone in our family. I have a clip from my great aunt, my grandmother's sister, a voicemail of her, because I had called her asking about her mother and her father, who died tragically. And I was asking family members about it, and she called me back and left a voicemail and said, "Shoshana, what is it that you want to know about my mom? Because we don't talk about that," and hung up. Now, she don't know this, but that clip is going to end up in some type of art piece. And the reason it's going to end up in some type of art piece is because the silence around that tragedy, the silence around that, despicable crime, the ways in which we lost family members, has had real impact on my family's dynamic. It has real impact on my mother, and that has had real impact on me, right? So I am digging into the story not to hurt anyone, but because that is a secret that no longer needs to be a secret. I'm not ashamed of my ancestors and the lives that they lived. I'm ashamed of the systems in which that harmed them, but I'm not ashamed of them. But that's my why. My why is to unearth what needs to be unearthed so that we can be closer to healing as a line as possible. Now, there are also interviews that I have with my mom and my aunt and my grandmother that are very tender, and I probably won't share them, but I hold to my heart that they felt open enough to share with me. And the reason why I won't share them now is because it's not in alignment with my why, right? Like, the why in that moment was to be a vessel to hold their truth, right? And one of the things we talk about in Earthseed is like, how do you hold other people's truth, right? How do you hold, if you're doing oral history interviews, how do we do that in a trauma-informed way? And part of that is to build relationship and build rapport, and to be honest about your why and what it is you're looking for. So I hope that answers the question too. I don't know if anybody else wanted to speak to what do you do when secrets come out? But the short answer is secrets gonna come out. Like, that's the whole point. That's the whole point. The whole point is to unearth the secret. Now, what you do with that is literally up to between you and your ancestors and what it is that they are urging you to do with that information.
Only thing I would add was just allow yourself to grieve it, because you should grieve it and you should feel it like full body and not run from it, even though it's sticky, even though it's heavy, it's hard. And then find like who are the people that are liberating whatever behavior, action that you're seeing in the archive that's dark. I found in mine, I'm one of the people that was meant to do it. My mom is one of the people who's meant to do it. So just as you find those secrets, you also find the antidotes. And if they're not there, like Joshana is saying, right, you become the why of it, but to give yourself the space and time to feel all of the things.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Are there any other questions? Anything else that, before we wrap up, I know we're a little over time. Is there anything else that you folks would feel like will help you, not just in the application, but in this moment that we find ourselves in? If you are in this space, you are probably a transgenerational healer. You are probably a transgenerational curse breaker. You are probably a memory worker. You are probably a creator and a manifester. And you and your work and your presence is needed at this time. There is a systemic and structural effort to erase our history. Like, that's just what's happening, y'all. There are laws being passed to criminalize safe spaces for queer and trans folks. You know, there is so much happening in the world that is trying to rewrite who we are, rewrite who we've been, and disconnect us from our ancestors and the magic that they have. So I just want to urge you to continue to show up in your practice. We have one more question. On average, how many hours per week did you work on your projects?
About it in hours per week.
You
huh?
never thought of in hours.
No.
No. Yeah, because you just start living and it becomes so much a part of your life that you're like, okay, so I have my coffee and then I'm going to talk to my mom about this thing I found out. Did you know that, this person has 200 resources and a listing of the Apollo people? Let me tell you about it. Like, isn't that cool? So I don't think I thought about it in the way of hours. For us, it was the podcast, and we both had creative projects for digital collages or physical collages, and I did a poetry film, but the hours did not feel like they took away, but rather that they added to my life. And so I can't give you a number, but that's how I would frame it.
Yeah, probably an hour for me too. Like I mentioned, my great grandmother in that meditation with Alexis Pauline Gumbs was like, make sure you feed yourself, make sure you eat. So like your ancestors could be giving you downloads that aren't necessarily about the project, but about the work of memory. So the hours kind of blur together, but I would also say an hour probably.
And similarly, I talk to my grandma almost every day, and that's just like a part of my practice. So it was like, ooh, we're just having a conversation. I think the longest portion of the work was preparing for the showcase and like synthesizing, like, what exactly am I going to share in this period of time after this 6 months of like recordings. I would say that was probably the most challenging part, the most fun too. Like I laughed so much just hearing the stories back. But that is where I probably spent the majority of the time, is just trying to figure out like, what do I want to share? Like, it's also beautiful and robust. And so maybe spending like 2 to 4 hours on that portion of it, just putting the audio into like a nice little package to be shared out at the showcase.
Yeah. So I would say that that's, something to keep in mind when you're applying. And then our last question is, speaking of grief, what does the collective grieving practices, rituals look like? Are those practices explicitly implemented? Absolutely. I would say, one, we actually had a community event co-hosted with Kinkofa that was open to the public, that was focused just on grief. The whole half hour or half part of the 2-hour event was Gina Breedlove, who is a grief doula, walking us through a grief meditation. That's on our YouTube. That's available. But also, we have real check-ins. Okay, we have real check-ins. We meditate. We move our body. We listen to music. We do writing exercises, journaling prompts. We have focused creative sessions. So yeah, we are definitely, I would say that each session is a practice of rituals. Like we approach the work as if we are in practice, not necessarily as if we are going to work to produce something. So I hope that is helpful to you all. And that is,
Just sounded really quick.
yes, Shay.
Just a little context. Like, I actually missed my first Earthseed session because I was at a memorial service for an ancestor in my life. And when I came back to the second session, like, I didn't come into the session feeling like I had missed anything, that like I couldn't be a part of the cohort. I, in fact, came in feeling very held by everyone, and like the session itself just made me feel really held. And so just to name that, like, my grief had a space in the space. because I was still processing it and holding space for it. And I think the Earthseed like cohort model is really built around just making sure that you can feel all your feelings so that you can create space to feel whatever else you need to feel too.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Shay, Kamaria, Raina, and Miss Norma. I appreciate y'all for showing up and answering my call. Thank you so much, Kinkofa, for your seamless magic behind the scenes. And thank you all for showing up. This replay will be available on our YouTube page. Again, visit our website, go to our Facebook page. Just stay in touch. Let us know how this was for you. If you are applying, you have until December 14th to get your application in. Until next time, I appreciate all of you. Be well, be healthy, be blessed.